before actually allowing the user to delete a contact, we want to make sure they really want to do it. So when the deleteContact method gets called as a result of selecting the deleteContact menu item, the first thing we do is put together an alert dialog to ensure that the user really does want to remove the contact. So if the user touches the positive button within the dialog, which is our delete button, then we'll execute the onClick method of that button. Otherwise, if they touch the negative button, you can see we have null as the second argument here, which will simply cause us to dismiss the dialog. So let's go back up here and take a look at what happens when the user touches the positive button within the dialog. So in the onClick method, first at lines 153 and 154, we create a database connector object. And by the way, notice that we've declared that final because we're going to be using it inside of an anonymous inner class. And when you have a local variable used within an anonymous inner class, you must declare the local variable final, otherwise you will get compiler errors from the Java compiler. Now, in this case, we decided to create the asynchronous task called deleteTask as an anonymous class that extends async task. And the only piece of data that we really care about in this case is a long integer that's going to represent the particular contact to remove from the database, the row ID. And that's the value that will get passed into doInBackground when this asynchronous task gets executed. Now, within doInBackground, we call the deleteContact method of our database connector. That's going to go ahead and remove the contact from the database for us. Then when the doInBackground method finishes, the onPostExecute method will execute in the GUI thread, and all we're doing in this case is calling the finish method of the activity, which terminates this activity and returns us back to the calling activity. So if in fact this was called from the address book activity, which is always the case for the viewContact activity, then we will return back to the address book activity at this point. Now, after creating the anonymous inner class object, line 176 executes that task, passing in as an argument the row ID. And in fact, the syntax that I used here, now that I look at it more carefully, is unnecessary. I could have simply passed the row ID here rather than creating my own new long array of one long integer, because remember, the execute method receives a variable length parameter list that becomes the set of arguments to the doInBackground method, and that Java automatically would have taken the row ID and turned it into an array with row ID as the first argument for me anyway. So again, all we're doing here is making sure that the deleting of the contact is happening outside of the GUI thread of execution. Once we're done performing that task, we call finish on the activity, which returns us back to the address book activity.